This is the Blood Red Podcast from the Liverpool Echo.
It's the Blood Red Podcast, courtesy of the Liverpool Echo. I'm Guy Clarke. Welcome along. Luis Suarez and Philippe Coutinho, two shining South American stars who lit up Anfield before being lured away by the might of Barcelona. With both being rumoured with Anfield returns, today's news, tomorrow's fish paper, we're going to chat through the possibilities of either returning to write a glorious final chapter to their Liverpool careers. Here to do that, we have David Lynch, Addison and Marcus Banks. Lynchy, I'll come to you first. It's the international break. We're full of fantasy and the rumour mill in full drive. What have you made of the speculation with sort of both Coutinho and Suarez having their names tentatively linked with a return?
Yeah, but it's an interesting one, isn't it? I think with Coutinho, it sort of says a lot about what's happened to him since he left Liverpool. Obviously, that was his dream move. He always wanted to make the move to Barcelona. He made no secret of that, even when he was at Liverpool. And so, you can't really begrudge him making that move, but it just hasn't worked out for him at all there, really, has it? It's it's been a bit of a nightmare, really. I don't think he's ever found a real position and nailed it down. I think they wanted him as that attacking midfielder, sort of withdrawn, didn't he? And he's ended up playing sometimes in the front three and never really sort of known what he is at Barcelona. And it's just hasn't found the form he did at Liverpool, and he hasn't been as important a player there. So that's a real shame for him. So no real surprise to see him sort of on the market. And with Suarez, I suppose, he's probably done it better than anyone maybe imagined at Atletico. Big part of their title charge this season. Probably proved Barcelona wrong a little bit, I suppose, in the way he's performed this season. But it's, he's obviously well regarded by Liverpool supporters, so the idea of being linked with him will cause a lot of excitement, I'm sure. But it's, he's a different end of his career, I suppose, than a lot of the players in this Liverpool squad. But, an interesting option, an interesting story.
Yeah, Matt, what have you made of it with the sort of both players being linked? Is there sort of credence, do you think, to an understanding as to why both are being perhaps mooted with returns?
Yeah, I think it's a little bit more down the romantic sort of side of it. I don't think there's really too much truth in Liverpool going after these two players. I don't think it's two players that typically Liverpool would be interested in. I mean, we all know how they've both left and the sort of relationships that maybe Coutinho in particular had with Jurgen Klopp and that sort of thing. I don't think it's necessarily something that would make a great deal of sense for Liverpool in terms of that. I don't think it would make a massive amount of sense in terms of the age and the cost of these players either. But I can understand, where these links come from. I mean, they're obviously two very, very good players when they're at their best. But as Lynchy said, they're both at ends of their careers. Even Coutinho is, 28 nowadays? He's not the kind of player that you would expect Liverpool to go after. And obviously, I know they've gone after Thiago Alcantara last summer. That sort of goes against that sort of thing. But generally speaking, the FSG strategy and the way that Liverpool recruit is very much at the other end of the scale. So, yeah, for me, it's understandable why people might get excited about both of these players. I think there's definitely one more than the other, which I'm sure we'll come to later, which I'd personally be more interested in bringing to Liverpool. But in terms of the likelihood of either of them happening, I wouldn't be betting on either of them, to be perfectly honest.
Fair enough. Marcus, looking at it then, both players being linked, I suppose it's kind of understandable, isn't it, that Liverpool are going to probably be in need of bringing in a forward player if you take into consideration the African Cup of Nations midway through next season. Both Salah and Mane likely to be away with that. Even maybe Naby Keita, throw him in there to the argument for the point on Coutinho. There is kind of a bit of an understanding as to why these guys might be on the radar.
Yeah, I think Coutinho specifically, in the fact that Klopp likes to target players who can play a variety of roles across the front three. And Coutinho's, I mean, he had some of his best games in the season before he left, playing as that 8, playing in the role that maybe people thought Naby Keita could come in and play. He was in that bit more withdrawn role, sort of the Andres Iniesta role that maybe Barcelona tried to sign him for. But he has obviously showed his versatility by playing on the left of the forward three, left of a 4-2-3-1. So I think he definitely would fit the bill, and personally, I'd like to see it happen. I think he could add a little bit of unknown entity back into that Liverpool attack. And then the Suarez links make sense because I think everyone knows that Liverpool need to sign a striker, or at least a forward option this summer with Divock Origi probably not likely to stay or not good enough to be at Liverpool anymore. Obviously, you've got the links to Patton Daka who can play across the front line too, but Suarez is a bit more of that traditional number 9. But like Matt and Lynchy said, doesn't really make sense from his age, the money he'll be on, and whether Atletico would even be willing to part ways with him given the season that he's had and the impact he's had on Simeone's team. You've got to think that Atletico will be doing everything in their power to keep him around for at least one more season.
Well, it could be a Robbie Fowler-like return for Luis Suarez, different end of his career to when he left. But let's start on Philippe Coutinho, Dave, and have a chat about him and what he could possibly bring. It's kind of being rumoured that 35-40 million pound might be sort of the watermark for the price that Barcelona are looking at. Surely for any club, Liverpool or any other Premier League side, that's an absolute steal, isn't it?
Yeah, when you consider the amount of money that changed hands for him to go the other way to Barcelona, it's an absolutely incredible deal. I know, he is on the older side of things, I suppose now, 28 years old, but he's still got a lot of good years ahead of him, you'd think. So it seems like an incredible deal if that's what Barcelona are willing to sell him for. I think for Liverpool, it's an interesting one. I think, we've talked about his ability to play in different positions, and maybe as a backup to that front three, that would be helpful to have him around, but I can't imagine that's a role he's chewing at the bit to take on to be a backup to those guys, even though they'll be away, for a part of the season with the AFCON being on. I think, that's not something that would necessarily appeal. And I think, if there was a central midfielder, an attacking midfield role being made available to him, that would, maybe indicate a shift in Jurgen Klopp's thinking about the composition of his midfield going forward. I don't think we've seen anything to suggest that that's going to happen, but it is entirely possible if, depending on what other business they do this summer, if they, tend to think that they want to maybe swap Firmino out for an out-and-out number 9, maybe you do need more of that attacking presence then from an attacking midfield point of view. Because that's the space where Firmino does a lot of his good work. Obviously, I know he starts as a centre forward, but he drops into that attacking midfield area. So, say you were to bring in, and not suggesting he would do both these deals, but say you brought in someone like an Erling Haaland who wants to be on the last man, he wants to be on the shoulder constantly. That does create a space in that number 10 area that Coutinho would really like. So, it'd be an interesting one from that perspective. I think, if Liverpool were looking to do that and reconstitute the midfield, bringing in a player who knew the system and knew all the players would, be pretty handy. But equally for that price, I'm not sure whether, a club like Arsenal, maybe, for example, would maybe see him as more of a better fit for what they need. Say if they couldn't get a deal over the line for Odegaard in the summer, Coutinho at that price, a Premier League experienced attacking midfielder, would be perfect for them. So, I'd expect sort of links like that to start surfacing if he is to be available this summer.
It's one of those, though, isn't it, Matt, where if the deal were to be done at, say, £35 million, given he initially arrived from Inter Milan for what, £8.5 million, and I like Marcus is wearing the Inter Milan training top just to sort of pay homage to Coutinho arriving from them in the first place. But in terms of that, what's that, an overall outlay of perhaps sort of 43 million pounds or whatever? It's pretty much a £100 million profit that FSG would still have stood to have made on Coutinho.
It is. It's more, I think, a case of how he would fit into this Liverpool team rather than the finances behind it. I think they've made such a big profit on him now. If they were to bring him back, that kind of is almost irrelevant because of the figures that Barcelona have already spent on him. But I think for me, the way I would look at it, and I think out of Coutinho or Suarez, Coutinho would be the one that I'd edge towards if you had to pick one to come back to Liverpool. But I think this season of all seasons would have been a season if you did want somebody like Coutinho. I think this season would have been the one to have him and when he could have been most useful, because we've seen Liverpool have been coming up against much more defensive, low blocks, that sort of thing. They've maybe not had the creativity coming from the fullbacks as much as they have in previous seasons. I think if ever there was a season for Coutinho to come in and have a big impact on this Liverpool team, it probably would have been this one. And I imagine next season, when potentially fans are back, defences can't sit quite as deep as what they have done. Everything kind of changes, and I think maybe Liverpool go back to a little bit more what they were last season rather than this season. Obviously, as well as fans, you can sort of add in the injury situation and all of the knock-on effects in terms of that sort of thing. So I think for me, this season, Coutinho could have actually been fairly useful for Liverpool in terms of helping them create and maybe in one or two of those games in that 6-game losing streak at Anfield, maybe he could have been a player to have made a difference. But I do wonder, whether next season we'll see a Liverpool that's a bit more, a Jurgen Klopp Liverpool. And for me, I just don't think that a typical number 10, a Coutinho type player would fit into that. Now, you could look at it and say, well, you can have him as a kind of squad option, somebody to rotate in and out, but then you've got to ask yourself the question of whether he would accept that. And I think a bit like Lynch, you said before, I mean, if someone like an Arsenal or a Tottenham or someone came in for him, and he would know that he would go into that first team and be a player that they could build around. I think that's maybe something that Philippe Coutinho needs as well. I think that's been a big issue for him at Barcelona, the fact that obviously their main man is Lionel Messi, and obviously if you're another player, you kind of have to feed him rather than everyone else feeding you. I think it would make more sense for me for Coutinho to end up probably back in England, where I think he is suited to playing, but maybe at an Arsenal, a Tottenham, a team more like that, even a Leicester, to be honest, under Brendan Rodgers. That would be something. I know they've obviously got James Maddison and one or two others in that position, but I think stylistically and from a sort of personal perspective, it probably would make sense to play somewhere else for Coutinho himself as much as anything else.
I'll open this point up to everyone. I'll ask you first, Marcus, though, but is maybe this with Coutinho not built too much in fantasy, and that he is a very different player? I know we'll look at Suarez in a bit and say age maybe not on his side, but just looking at the numbers and having done some crunching, Philippe Coutinho, during his time at Liverpool, 201 appearances, 54 goals, 45 assists. That's 99 goal contributions, pretty much won every other game. Since he's gone to Barcelona, he scored 23 goals and got 14 assists in 90 appearances. So that's 37 goal contributions, nearly sort of 1 in 3 or 1 in 2.5. Is he now very much a different player? He's going to be 29 in the summer as well. And would he command even sort of a place in the starting 11 at Liverpool?
I think he was obviously sat in Barcelona's sort of fall from grace. I feel like he is almost being set up to fail in a way. I think it would have been hard for anyone, especially with that price tag and the pressure of playing at one of the biggest clubs in Spain, the pressure from the fans. We've seen with Gareth Bale, we've seen in the past, Cristiano Ronaldo being booed by Real Madrid fans. I think it was always going to be difficult for him to go into that Barcelona team who were stuck in transition. The club is a bit of a mess right now. So I think it was always going to be difficult for him, but I do think that a move back to Liverpool, I mean, for me, I think it's a no-brainer. For the 35 million that is being talked about, I think Liverpool should be all over that, especially when you factor in that you could possibly get 15 million for Marco Grujic, possibly 10 million for 15 million for Harry Wilson in the summer. Swapping those players who probably have no future at Liverpool for a player of Coutinho's calibre, who is 28, approaching his prime, Premier League proven, and similar to the way that Thiago Alcantara was signed, to just offer something different to Liverpool. I think that it should be a no-brainer. You look at we spoke all the time about Liverpool's lack of depth, and whether he will come and accept a squad player role remains to be seen. But I feel if you look at Man City, a player like Bernardo Silva, who's sort of similar, that he can play in the centre midfield out wide. He knows he doesn't start every game, but he is there to offer Pep Guardiola options in the forward three in the midfield. So I think Coutinho is a bit of a no-brainer. I think he'd suit the Liverpool team now more than he suits Barcelona, because he would offer something better on the left if you want to switch Mane. I think in that number 8 role is where he could play, especially with, you've got to think that with Fabinho behind him, and then he hasn't played with Virgil van Dijk at Liverpool with a solid backline, that Alisson Becker Virgil van Dijk partnership that was bought with the funds from his sales, whether you could see a completely different Liverpool team with Coutinho in it.
Dave, on that point though, is there not maybe an argument that, albeit he's going to be 28 at the moment, 29 before next season, that he's already had his prime? Liverpool maybe got the best 5 years out of him before he went to Barcelona. He's been part of a failed project at Barcelona. I think that's probably fair to say. And actually, he may already be over the hill.
Yeah, it's entirely possible, isn't it? I suppose some players do peak earlier than others. Some you would consider, 28, 27, 28, 29 to maybe be the peak years. But for some players, it doesn't quite work out that way. And to ask him to then come back to obviously a league he knows, but to a change in style over the summer when he is hitting 29, and to just suddenly drop in and expect all these things from him, I find it hard to imagine Liverpool doing that. And I suppose there's the underrated element as well of maybe Jurgen Klopp thinking, not that he's someone to hold grudges, but just thinking, you'd left this Liverpool before we were on the cusp of achieving great things because you didn't think it was going to happen. His lack of belief in his teammates at that time and the squad that was there to go on and achieve things is, that must rankle a little bit. I think the idea of bringing him back into the squad, we would probably lean against not doing that because, I think he would. It's not a grudge, is it? But I just suppose you would remember that and think, what message does it send to bring him back even now, even if it's in a sense of trying to rehabilitate him and get his career back on track. So, yeah, I think even if there's an argument that he would fit the system, I think Liverpool, with the transfer record they've got and the ability they've got to look at players from all sorts of different leagues and know them inside out through the statistics, I think they would maybe just lean towards someone who profiles similarly, if that's the sort of player they want, but someone who is different and younger and maybe, physically a little better as well. Because I think if there's one Coutinho weakness you could pick out is that, his pressing and running, it was not at the level of the Liverpool players that remained after he left. So I think Liverpool would maybe look, if they do want that sort of play, they would look at their options and see what else is out there.
Yeah, and Matt, people will sort of be thinking, well, we've got Naby Keita maybe within the squad with the profile of being able to unlock defences, and he's not been fit enough. Looking at Coutinho this season, he's not played since the 29th of December in a 1-1 draw with Eibar for Barcelona, and he's only actually completed 90 minutes once in a 3-1 El Clasico defeat at the Nou Camp as well. So it doesn't really seem as though this is a player who will be consistently available for selection. When he was at Liverpool in the first place, he was often a player helping Liverpool win by 4, 5 and 6 goals at times. And since that, it's obviously been that move away to last year, winning by the odd goal 14 times in the Premier League. They maybe lack that creativity, but is he going to be on the pitch and able to produce enough?
I think the difference in terms of the injuries, I think I'm right in saying that Coutinho's injuries this season has been one big injury that he's had, rather than with Naby Keita, it's a case of playing 2 games and then being off for 5, 6, 7. So it's maybe not quite the same thing, but again, it is one of those things that Liverpool will look at. They will look for players who have impeccable injury records. I think that's going to be especially important if Gini Wijnaldum leaves this summer. You need somebody in there who can play pretty much every game, as Wijnaldum has done. So I think that is definitely a consideration. It wouldn't necessarily be as big a thing as it is with Naby Keita, and you can't always predict. I think Eden Hazard's injury record was pretty good before he left to go to Real Madrid, and suddenly that's fallen off a cliff. So you can't always predict these things. But yeah, you're spot on. He's missed half of this season. He's not played as many minutes as probably he would have wanted to. I think Barcelona probably, if they'd have got a decent offer for him last summer, could well have let him go. But that didn't happen, of course, with the pandemic and all of that sort of thing. So it's a difficult situation, I think, for Coutinho to know what to do, where to go. Not all teams play with number 10s. They don't really fit necessarily in the Premier League. I mentioned a few teams earlier in terms of like a Leicester or Arsenal or a team like that. They may well have other targets as well and may well have moved past them. I'm sure Arsenal, for example, would be pretty keen to try and get Martin Odegaard on a permanent basis. I'm sure they would prioritise that over going for somebody who's considerably older and probably not much better, or maybe not even better at all, if we're being honest. So it's going to be an interesting one for him. I think his injuries haven't helped. I think if he could have played a few more games, particularly in the second half of this season, he could have almost put himself into a bit of a window, and maybe in the Champions League or maybe even just domestically, if he'd have got a couple of goals, maybe there would have been a little bit more interest in him. But I just wonder, where the options are going to come from. I can't, to be honest, see Liverpool going for him. I can't see one or two of the other big clubs around Europe going for him. You do sort of wonder where that interest is going to come from. And it is a bit of a shame for him because he is quite clearly a top-class player, but it's just not quite happened for him this season.
Yeah, 5 years at Anfield. He, of course, moved on before Liverpool started winning silverware, but Luis Suarez did get some silverware under his belt as a Liverpool player. The 2012 League Cup win over Cardiff City, a great win for Liverpool. Marcus, let's open up on Luis Suarez, and what are your thoughts on this one? Marcus, you're on mute there, mate.
Yeah, Suarez is obviously it's a strange one because he was, in my eyes, he's the best Liverpool player I've ever watched live. He was electric. Every time you got the ball, you thought you knew something was going to happen. That the season that Liverpool finished second, and even from his debut, you knew that he was a special player. And obviously, his goal record has continued at Barcelona. You were definitely wrong to let him go, and he's proven everyone wrong again at Atletico. But I think it comes into the age thing, and I think it is a really tough one because the Liverpool fan deep inside me would love to see him back, but it just doesn't make sense. And I think Aguero is a prime example of a player. I mean, Suarez has been relatively injury free, but as you approach the twilight of your career, those muscle injuries start becoming longer, more serious, and more frequent. And Man City haven't been able to rely on Sergio Aguero this season. I think Suarez actually is older than Aguero, so you've got to wonder how long Liverpool would get out of him for the price and probably wages he would command. Given that I think he paid his way out of his Barcelona contract, so he's probably earning a fair amount at Atletico at the minute. Whereas you've also got the issue, I think, if Liverpool are going to sign someone for the front three, they're going to have longevity in mind, and the fact that Salah, Firmino and Mane are all around the same age, they'd much rather sign someone of a similar age to Diego Jota who can come in for 5-6 seasons rather than maybe stopgap to 1 season, 1 or 2. So I think, yeah, it would be. I'd love to have him back, but I think it won't make sense, and I think Liverpool know that, and I wouldn't read too much into the reports anyway.
He's 34, Dave. He's got a year left on his Atletico Madrid contract. I'm pretty right in saying his daughter's named Delfina, isn't it? A reworking of Anfield. Could he not come back for 2 years and have a romantic finale?
Well, there's a suggestion, isn't there, that his Atletico contract has got some sort of clause in it that would allow him to leave on a free this summer, which is interesting. So, Liverpool wouldn't have to outlay any sort of transfer fee for him. So, and to get some sort of experience back up to Firmino in that number 9 position, could really appeal. And as Marcus rightly points out, one of the most incredible players when he was at Anfield. I think one thing to consider with the Suarez thing is maybe some of the damage he did off the pitch when he was at Anfield maybe doesn't get spoken about enough anymore. We remember how you are genuinely incredible footballer, and I think you just did some things that I couldn't believe at the time. Just coming away from Anfield with your mouth still wide open from just stunning things he did on the pitch. But I just think he's got that baggage, hasn't he, of the racism storm with Evra, which he readily admitted to guilt in that and deservedly got banned for. That dragged Liverpool's name through the mud. He did the same with the name of Kenny Dalglish, the iconic figure in Liverpool Football Club's history. Dragged him into that situation, and which was a complete mess, and tainted his legacy somewhat, really, with his association with Suarez and that whole situation, and the likes of Gerrard and Carragher who've said they regretted the way they acted around that situation. So I thought it was a real moment of catharsis when Liverpool beat Barcelona in the Champions League, and Suarez was being himself on the pitch, the usual, pushing things, playing on the line, and sort of trying to wind everyone up, and the crowd used a non-family friendly chant that I won't repeat on this podcast, but it sort of felt like finally that sort of relationship with Suarez and that adoration had been broken. And I think, as good as he was a player who, I think his legendary status at Anfield sometimes is overstated. At the end of the day, he wanted to leave. He talked about the possibility of leaving at every available opportunity, every time he was on international duty. So he obviously didn't care about the fans that much. He was phenomenal at football, but not a great character. The way he behaved on the pitch and off the pitch, not extremely questionable. And I thought the idea of him coming back had been broken with the way the fans received him in that Barcelona tie, because they saw. This is exactly why everyone else in English football hated him when he was here. When you play against him and you come up against him, you realise what he's like as a character. And I think I thought that was a moment that finally broke that relationship between the two. So the idea of sort of rekindling that and having Liverpool, re-sign Suarez, it just doesn't appeal to me at all. And I think maybe if all fans looked at it that way, and consider what he's actually like and the damage he did to Liverpool's reputation at the time, I don't think it would appeal either, because nobody wants to have to go through the process of having to defend him again. It was tiring enough the first time around. So I think that should be the end of the story with Liverpool and Suarez, to be honest. Sorry, I went on a bit of a rant there, didn't I?
Yeah, no, I was going to say, take that one as a no from Dave. Matt, I'll ask you about him. I read out the numbers for Coutinho, so I'll do likewise for Suarez. Atletico Madrid this season, he's played 31 times. He's got 19 goals and 2 assists, 21 goal contributions. During his time at Barcelona, 195 goals, 112 assists. That's 307 goal contributions in just 283 games. So better than an involvement a game. And at Liverpool, even that's staggering. 133 games, 82 goals, 47 assists, 129 goal contributions in 133 games. Just put that into perspective. Mohamed Salah's got 119 goals, 45 assists, which is 164 goal contributions in 92 games. So is it fair to say that Luis Suarez has been Liverpool's greatest ever Premier League player?
I think it's a difficult one. I mean, in terms of the football, he's obviously right up there, but then I don't think you can separate, as David listed off, all of those incidents that come with it. I don't think you can separate those two things. So I think they do come as a package. They come hand in hand. I mean, you can't argue with the actual numbers that you've read out there in terms of each of his clubs. He's obviously putting down huge numbers of goals. They obviously are the biggest thing in football. If you score those sorts of goals, you're obviously going to be the biggest and the most valuable player. But for me, in terms of a return, I don't think it's going to be on the table for a variety of reasons. But for me, the priority this summer for Liverpool has got to be to get another version of Diogo Jota, in that it's somebody who you can sort of have a project for. He can play in all three positions. He's considerably younger, probably you're looking at 11, 12 years younger than what Luis Suarez is now. For me, that has to be Liverpool's priority. And I think that is what the evidence of the past few seasons has suggested. I think the fact that they went for Jota last season, I think that there could well be a repeat. I don't know who that would be, but I think that's what they would be aiming for. I think what Liverpool have always done is to not go for the finished product, or possibly even a product that was finished a few years ago with Luis Suarez and has maybe sort of started his decline. It's been the other way around, hasn't it? It's been a case of finding someone who can step up, and I think that's what you've got to do in terms of the longevity of this front three. Is it's not going to go on forever. I think we've had plenty of conversations on this podcast and on other podcasts about all of the front three approaching 30. We've talked at length about potential succession plans. We've talked about, maybe do you have to move on one of the front three to finance, the next generation? I think if you go and sign somebody who is 4 or so years older than all of those players, that just sort of undoes all of that work. So, yeah, for me, the priority lies elsewhere. As I say, I can understand, given the numbers and that sort of side of things, why people might look at it and think, especially on a free transfer, it might be something to look at. But I think Liverpool have always and will always, under FSG, look far more long-term than that.
Would it not, though, Marcus, in terms of FSG and the way they look at things, if there is that break clause for Suarez to maybe move on a free transfer, as we said at the top of the show, with Salah and Mane both likely to go away on AFCON duty in the middle of next season, Liverpool might need two players, and take Matt's point of a Diogo Jota-like player within the squad as well. That backup in a centre forward role, if it's not going to cost you a transfer fee and just wages for maybe a couple of seasons, and you can negotiate some kind of deal with Suarez, maybe that it scales back in that second year, would it not then give more money in the pot for getting another top class option who would be around for maybe the next evolution of this squad?
Yeah, I think that if and it is obviously a massive if that was to happen, then that is the only case. If that break clause is actually in that contract, I can't see Liverpool paying any fee. I think FSG have shown they're willing to break that transfer strategy for the right player in Thiago Alcantara, but even then they weren't willing to pay the 20 million up front and agree to the 5 million staggered over the 4 years, and it was a player that they sort of evolved the team rather than to supplement the midfield that they've already got, whereas Suarez will be coming in as a backup option. But that like I say, that is the only feasible option that I could see, that Suarez comes in as well as whoever that target is, like Matt said, who can play probably on the left and the right, through the middle, because you've got to factor in Harvey Elliott. He's probably going to be coming into that probably as the backup for one of the front three next season. More opportunities off the bench, but Liverpool do need that number 9, that striker, and Suarez, and possibly one option would solve the AFCON issue and give Liverpool some real strength in depth. But like everyone said, I don't see it happening. I think if FGR are going to buy 2, they probably will buy 2 young players rather than looking for an older experienced option.
Yeah, interesting to see though what does play out, and two players who obviously gave great moments on the pitch, maybe not off it, but certainly on the pitch to Liverpool fans during their time with the club. But before we go, we've had somewhat of a reunion episode, maybe, and albeit a player who's not played for Liverpool before, but being talked about with a Premier League return is Juventus's Aaron Ramsey, David, and we know that Jorginho Wijnaldum's likely to be moving on, and Aaron Ramsey's being touted as a possible replacement. He's 30 years of age, earning an eye-watering £400,000 a week. This isn't going to happen, is it?
Yeah. Well, it was interesting. There was talk, wasn't there, before he went to Juventus that Liverpool were looking at him and had some interest, but then obviously if Juventus were going to be able to offer that sort of wage, then that's way too rich for Liverpool. It's an interesting one now because I suppose he's going to have to be willing to accept a pay cut if he wants to make a move back this way. If things haven't quite worked out for him in Italy, I don't think he's ever really sort of nailed down a role there, has he? So, if he does want to come back to Britain and start playing the Premier League again, I think he's going to have to take a massive cut on that. And if Liverpool were interested, as was rumoured at the time, and I think it would have made sense that they were because he was a talented British player that he could have got a lot of years service out of. If Liverpool are interested, it'd have to be for a really low fee, given the fact he's 30 now, and he would have to take a massive cut in terms of his payment terms. So, yeah, I think Liverpool would maybe be one of those situations he'd maybe be monitoring because he's a player of interest in the past, but it's hard to see how the financial elements of this deal come together for them to do it this summer.
Yeah, he's got 2 years left on his contract at Juventus, Matt. As David said, I can't imagine Liverpool would even think about matching the wages. And if you're even putting in a transfer fee in there as well, that really seems like a deal that couldn't be done unless it's something maybe like what saw Gareth Bale go back to Tottenham from Real Madrid, and Juventus is subsidising some of it. And in the end, it ends up being a loan move. But again, that doesn't really suit either party, does it?
No, I mean, we mentioned Gini Wijnaldum before, and I think that the reason that Gini Wijnaldum is maybe being let go, if you like, is the fact that Liverpool are trying to refresh things. They've got a few players similar to the front three, almost at that sort of 30-ish age. You think of Wijnaldum, Thiago, Jordan Henderson, all in that similar area. You can't replace them all at once, and it's a case of slowly, season by season, maybe phasing one or two out each year and sort of slowly evolving and making the next steps in terms of the next generation of players. And I think if you were to lose Gini Wijnaldum and replace him with a player who is pretty much an identical age, it just wouldn't make any sense in terms of the football side of things. I don't think it would make sense financially. I think, to be honest, I think that the link has probably come because Juventus are so desperate to offload a few players. They've wasted a lot of money. They're a long way behind in the title race over in Italy this season. There's rumours of Andrea Pirlo, the manager, being under pressure and that sort of thing. I think they've just made a few mistakes in the transfer market. Aaron Ramsey was a very expensive one of those, and they're probably just trying to push and generate a little bit of interest. I think for me, as much as Aaron Ramsey, it does kind of make sense in that Liverpool have been looking at him in the past. I think this is very much a case of either an agent or a football club trying to drum up a bit of interest to try and sell off a player. I just can't see any truth in it whatsoever.
No, is that your thoughts on it, Marcus, that Manchester United are one of the clubs being linked, and if Juventus and his agent can get as many names interested, maybe they might just take a bite at him?
Yeah, I think Matt was completely right. I think it doesn't make any sense for Liverpool, especially obviously we don't know the ins and outs of Wijnaldum's contract decision, but the whole it seems as though an offer has been on the table for Wijnaldum, but they're possibly not willing to put him in the highest bracket of earners, and it would make no sense to let a player of Wijnaldum's quality go, and a player who fits Jurgen Klopp's system so well, and then come in and pay someone who's a similar age those sort of wages too, while letting Wijnaldum go. It makes no sense at all. And there's also an argument that Liverpool don't need to replace Wijnaldum when he leaves. You've got Curtis Jones already proven to be a first team regular. You've got Naby Keita's going to be pushing for more minutes if he can prove his fitness finally. So there's an argument that Liverpool don't need another midfielder, and if funds are going to be limited as they have been in recent seasons, and if other areas of the squad are in desperate need of strengthening more, so it's a complete non-starter for me. And if Liverpool are to sign a centre mid again, it goes back to the point that they're probably going to sign someone who's 22, 23, who they can get 5-6 seasons out of, rather than Adam Ramsey, who's done nothing to prove over the last few years that he can fit into Klopp's system and be a good signing, really.
Yeah, no, it seems to be quite unanimous on that one. Well, that's all we've got time for this week here on the Blood Red Podcast. We'll be back on Monday with a Q&A special, so do get involved with us throughout our social channels to put your questions to us. We'll try and get through as many of those as we can on Monday. But until then, thanks for your time and your company. Bye for now.
This is the Blood Red Podcast from the Liverpool Echo.